David, welcome to the podcast. It's a delight to finally meet you, albeit virtually, having read your work for the last few years. Regulars to the podcast will have heard your work, and you very recently created a haiku moment for us, which people can see if they go to the website or directly to the Poetry P YouTube channel. But if you don't know about David, here's a little bit about him. David J. Kelly is a scientist by training. He's got a PhD in zoology, but has been fascinated by the music of language for longer than he can remember. He says his hobbies are birds and words, and his first collection, Hammerscale from the Thrush's Anvil, was published in November 2016 by Alba Publishing, and Small Hadron Divider by Red Moon Press in 2020. In fact, Small Hadron Divider was recognised with an honourable mention in the Touchstone Awards by the Haiku Foundation. Congratulations, David.
Thank you very much.
Johannes S. H. Bjerg said of it, "In this collection, you will get samples of it all, of human emotions and states of mind as they pass through David J. Kelly, be it self-irony, observations of human nature, and nature as nature, carefully expressed in the subgenre of haikai, haiku, senryu, haibun, concrete haiku, and more. A palette of many colours, worth reading and reading again." Now, according to the Haiku Foundation, and I'm sure David will tell us if this is true in a sec, the name derives from the particle accelerator Large Hadron Collider in CERN, Switzerland. Is that right now, David?
I borrowed from that name. So because the sections within the book are relating to the flavors of quarks, and the introduction to the book will explain that in more detail. But because these are pieces of protons and neutrons, then it seemed that thinking about atom smashers was a way of finding out how you get to a quark in the first place. So it borrows from the structure of that name.
I see. I have to say, all matters CERN goes right over my head. Really sorry about that. I'm too dim. But I have been to CERN and played cricket on their cricket pitch. You can be the judge of David's poetry now, because we're going to have a reading. I'm going to read the poems first, and David will follow. We thought it might be interesting to do an experiment on the interpretation of the reader versus the intention of the poet. Overthinking, thinking it over. I'm overthinking.
Overthinking, thinking it over. I'm overthinking.
Interesting. Okay. Light and mild. The drinker becomes the drink.
Light and mild. The drinker becomes the drink.
Orange tipped. A butterfly's wing dips into sunset.
Orange tipped. A butterfly's wing dips into sunset.
Footloose. A young foal learning to balance.
Footloose. A young foal learning to balance.
Vermilion. Too many poppies to count.
Vermilion. Too many poppies to count.
Silence descends as far as the ear can hear, flake by flake.
Silence descends as far as the ear can hear, flake by flake.
Broken sleep. The wind hurls the morning around me.
Broken sleep. The wind hurls the morning around me.
Behind the pigeon, a folded falcon unfolding.
Behind the pigeon, a folded falcon unfolding.
So it was interesting that I think we agreed in most of them apart from the first one.
And maybe some slight differences in intonation of some of the words as well.
Yes, absolutely. I'm very glad I let you read it because I like your version of Overthinking better than my version.
Oh, very good.
I'm delighted to say as well that David has got an example of Haibun from his book to read to us as well. So David, over to you for that, please.
Each of the sections within the collection has a Haibun to effectively introduce you to that section. This one is from the charm section, and it's called Ladybird, Ladybird. I used to fly in my dreams. Using a weird arm-swinging action, which I perfected in earlier dreams, it was possible to counteract gravity. By jumping into the air and using my clever technique, I could stay aloft. With practice, I learned a rudimentary form of steering, but it never worked well in strong winds. On reflection, it was quite like hot air ballooning, but without either hot air or a balloon. Frenzied movement hides the calm beneath, inverted swan. Apparently, dreams about flying suggest the dreamer wants to escape from a pressurized situation. That idea never occurred to me at the time. In my dreams, it seemed to me I was simply showing off. I delight in the startlement of passers-by as they met me in mid-flight. Comings and goings between open mouths, fly by night. I've no recollection of emotion from those dreams. The abiding memory is one of curiosity, the ability to investigate a new part of the world and the new perspective it offered. Maybe it was a sort of self-analysis, looking down on my world from a position of detachment. Maybe it was a form of lucid dreaming where I wanted to fly and found the means to allow myself that indulgence. Back down to earth, rising from a pillow with windswept hair.
Thanks, David. I read recently, I think it was Mike Railing from Failed Haiku. He said he always reads the poetry section part of a haibun first and makes his decision when he's choosing them based on the poetry. And I wondered, listening to you read, what comes first with you, the poetry or the prose?
It's not fixed, but
Okay.
I believe it's generally easier if you have your haiku to start with. So if you are exploring a situation or a location, an emotion, if it's possible to collect a few haiku from that, you can then write a story around those. That tends to be a lot easier than having a story with no haiku and then trying to fit something into it, because sadly, you generally see the cracks in those things.
Oh, that's interesting. So you had this series of haiku and then wrote the story around them. Is that how it worked for you?
I'm not entirely sure how this one came about. I think there were maybe some haiku, but not all of the ones that are here, and a story, and the two came together fortuitously.
Before I let you go, I have to ask too, you've had 2 books published now. How did you go about getting your first book published?
I think I was quite fortunate because I actually knew the name of a publisher. So not just the company, you mentioned Alba Publishing, but I actually knew the person who ran that publishing house, because they have connections with a number of other poets, haiku poets within Dublin. So I attended a number of book launches, and as time went by, I'd collected sufficient material that I thought there was a collection there. And I organized that in some way and then sent it along to this person. I even managed to raise the subject with them at the end of one of the book launches. And so it didn't even come as a surprise when that collection was sent. Now, I believe that's a position of privilege.
Mhm.
And other people may have to approach these people without that introduction. But I'm sure that's the best that you can do. You can get your work into some sort of order and then send it along to people who you believe are interested in publishing this specific type of work.
Yes. And I think if you're interested in haiku, you'll know the publishing houses who would be interested in talking to you, or in the first instance. And then obviously, having had the first book published, was it then easier to follow that up for the second one?
I found making the second collection more demanding than making the first collection. And
Oh.
I'm told that numerous authors of all different genres find the second book or collection more difficult to get a handle on than the first. And it took me a long time to decide what sort of structure I might want to it. The first collection and the second collection both have a number of sections, and each of those sections start with hybrid, and that felt like a good way of structuring the second book. But I wasn't happy that I had a way of linking the various sections. And so I cast about for some time before coming to the quark flavors, which coincidentally have a number of different useful headings. So if I may just list them, there are 6.
Mm-hmm.
There are up and down, top and bottom, strange and charm. And so if you interpret those liberally, you can move off in all sorts of different directions. And that proved very, very useful for grouping the work together.
Did you get any help and advice from publishers on what you needed to do?
I was very lucky that I basically looked at the work of other writers and found some themes to the way people were presenting their work. And I chose a style of presentation that I was most comfortable with. Now, I've seen other people work with maybe even a single theme on their entire collection. I don't think I can offer such focused work as that. So I had to find a way of offering subheadings. And perhaps the reason I chose the quark flavors was it offered me more subheadings than the previous collection.
I think you made a good point there, actually, that if somebody is considering putting a collection together or considering going to a publisher, they should try and get hold of and read and analyze some of the output of that publisher, of the haiku poets within that stable, so that they can basically have an idea of what to do and how to approach the whole thing.
Yes, and what's interesting as well is that there are quite a large number of collections now available as free ebooks online. I think some publishers say after 15 or 20 years, then they automatically make them available. So there's no need to have a hard copy at that point. So that's certainly very useful. And other people decide that they don't necessarily want a physical collection. They're quite happy to have the thing as a document, a virtual collection. And so you're free to explore them at that point.
Thank you for the advice for people who are starting out thinking about putting their first collection together. It's really very, very useful. And thank you so much for that reading. And I just wanted to go back to one of the poems. The great thing about talking to other poets and listening to other poets read their work is that I learn so much. And each time I speak to another poet, it inspires me to go ahead and write some more poems myself. And this poem that I'm going to read again really made me quite envious of your work. And the poem in question was: Broken sleep, the wind hurls the morning around me. I can just see myself now lying in bed, tossing and turning, and quite cross that I haven't had a good night's sleep, and a storm raging outside the window. It's just fabulous. And as with many really successful haiku, it's very simple, very simple. But it says everything in just those 3 simple lines, doesn't it?
Delighted you like it. And I think maybe the language it uses is a little unusual. And so perhaps one of the things that does is it doesn't give you quite such a concrete image. It gives you a feeling of something happening rather than an exact image. And so then what you do is you use your imagination to fill the gaps. And that's one of the things that can make this writing very different for different readers, because they bring their own experience to it. And so each reader can find a slightly different aspect.
Yes, you're right. Again, another very important point, that we should allow our poem some space, or some space within the poem for that reader to come along and make it their own. And I think the word that does that for me is hurls. The wind hurls the morning around me. It's such an unusual way of expressing it. As you said, it's not a concrete image, is it? It allows me to utilize my imagination within your poem, and it's just beautiful. Thank you. And it's been a pleasure to have you on the podcast. I hope you'll come back again. Are you putting together another collection?
I feel that I reached a point at the end of this collection where I wasn't quite sure what came next. So there could easily be another collection, but it's something that's coming together rather more slowly than the previous 2.
Okay. And how did you feel getting the Touchstone nomination?
Blown away. I had been considering the various different reviews that I'd seen of the collection in places like Blithe Spirit and Presence and Frog Pond and Modern Haiku, and it felt that there was a generally upbeat review of them, but no one was saying this is excellent or wonderful and this is exemplary work. And so to find that a jury, sort of a group of people together, a committee, were choosing it over so many other collections that were out there, was a big surprise amongst other things.
I can't imagine how excited you would have been. I would have been over the moon myself. So congratulations again for getting an honourable mention. And if anyone wants to buy Small Hadron Divider, how do they go about doing it?
Well, it's published by Red Moon Press, so I believe you could, if you're in the States, get in touch with them. It's on their website as one of the collections available. But if you happen to be based in Europe, it's probably easier to communicate with me through Twitter. My Twitter handle is @Motto Sakura, which is my attempt at Japanese. So that's MOTTO_SAKURA, which is an attempt to say more cherry blossom.
But if you're scrabbling around for your pens and pencils at the moment, don't worry. I will put the Twitter handle in the show notes, as well as the web address for Red Moon Press. So you'll have both there. So wherever you are in the world, you'll be able to get hold of David or his representatives and get hold of the book. So again, thank you so much, David, for coming along today and reading to us. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patricia, for the opportunity to do so.
It was wonderful. Thank you.